So back here in the office, first day of April, April Fool's Day, and had a very interesting day so far on this April Fool's Day. Had a Twitter exchange, scuffle, brouhaha of sorts with La Reina Gringodemica, Diane Ravitch, who is going to be, I guess, at Syracuse University School of Education today. And one of the young guns, person to definitely watch out for, is Derek Ford, graduate student up there. He's got some legit crit chops. He's a real old school critical theory guy, and he can bring it. He had tweeted that he was looking forward. He was stoked, he said, to have a conversation with Diane Ravitch and his critical theory group up at Syracuse. To which I responded, given her reactionary past, I'm April fooled to see the set stoked, Ravitch, and critical. And what was interesting is, and here's the April fool on me, is I responded and then realized that it had gone to her as well as Derek, as well as to the School of Education at Syracuse. And I went off to teach Luce Rigore, my undergraduate class, and when I came back, of course there was a response from Diane Ravitch, and what was hilarious was that she actually instructed me in her response to me that I should, quote, learn to live with wonder and passion. So given this setting, the commemoration of being and learning, the year-long writing of poetic phenomenological meditations, I responded and said, learning, suffering, passion, and Thamusein, wonder, and suffering, passion, live, all caps. And then I added the blog link, and I just wonder if she, and then I added that, but I don't suffer, and added another one, I don't suffer cynicism nor opportunism. So lacking in pathos are those ontologies. So April Fool's Day, it was I don't want to digress into anything having to do with DR, but I just will always remember her as someone who just made some really reactionary, excessive, and over-the-top comments about right in the wake of the terrorist attacks on 9/11, 2001, and if you just Google Ravitch multiculturalism 9/11, you'll see for yourself, and you can make your own, draw your own conclusions about her turn to critical theory. I'm not buying it at all, and so it was kind of funny, because who knows what, she doesn't know me. She has 89,000 followers on Twitter. I have 68. Right, I play in the catacombs in the underground, and so she's a pop critic, popular figure, pop intellectual, and so I don't suppose she'd ever heard of me, but I do know that if she went and lifted her finger to click the link to the Being and Learning blog, and if she spent a little bit of time watching any of the videos, perhaps this one, and if she picked up the book, I think she will have realized that she was lecturing the wrong person on the need to learn wonder and passion. That's for sure. Yeah, that's for sure. So here we are on this first day. We're into the third month, although the original work started in the middle part of February, and so we are in the third month. We're now in April, but we haven't yet finished 2 full months of the commemoration. I haven't yet written 2 full months, and so away we go. And I'm gonna, when I'm in my office, I decided it would be best to read from the original. So here's the binder where I collected each day, and I would print, make 3 holes and a 3-hole punch, and pop it in here. So this is now chapter 4 of Being and Learning, but it was originally just the meditation that was 4701.04. And in the beginning of my commemoration, I noted that 4701 was the lunar year of the Chinese calendar, 4701, and I did that because I started almost exactly on the Chinese New Year, which is Chinese New Year's usually in February, and so it was on or about the beginning of the new year, 4701. So I used to, in paying homage to that, and because Lao Tzu is an important figure for my work, I cataloged each meditation beginning 4701, and then the date, whatever the date was that day in the month. So this is from 4701.01.04. More on the allegory. When we turn to reflect on the allegory in more detail, we focus much attention on this important moment in the third part, when the released prisoner makes yet another important turn. This turn is the one that occurs last of all, when he is able to look at the sun and contemplate its nature. With this contemplation, he arrives at the moment where he sees the relations between things in their proper order. With this perception, he understands that the sun is the source of all things he has encountered, both in his home beneath the ground and in the open region where he has been released. The sun is both what produces and organizes, and thus is the ultimate source for the relations that exist throughout the world of experience. Indeed, the existence of the sun accounts for there being a relational coherence in this world. The essence of the released prisoner's contemplation of the sun is the attunement to this relationality that organizes the world. He sees this relationality with his vision of the sun. He sees the way of the seasons and the flow of time. The vision is a vision of relationality. In contemplating the sun, he becomes attuned to the proper relations between the phenomena of the world, quote, everything in the visible world, unquote, the world of experience, and most importantly, quote, all that he and his companions used to see, unquote. The fourth and final part of the story begins with the memory of his companions that emerges at the culmination of the liberated one's contemplation of the sun. This memory appears as the natural outcome of relationality. For how could he not recall his former ways of perceiving the world, specifically the context in which he understood it? He remembers not the bondage per se, but his fellow prisoners, his companions, with whom he saw the world that appeared before them. Illusion that it is, the subterranean world was their world, one they shared. The memory of seeing the world through a shared experience, which his liberation as a solo flight has failed to include, will eventually draw him back home in order to gather his companions to join him in the open region. Thus, in the final part of the allegory, we see how a vision of the proper order of the world ultimately brings out the desire to reform community when the companionship of a shared experience is recollected. The final part of the allegory is thus the final and decisive turning of the released prisoner who, for the first time, appears to be moving freely without the aid of his liberator. His final part appears as follows. Then, if he called to his mind his fellow prisoners and what had passed for wisdom in his former dwelling place, he would surely think himself happy in the change and sorry for them. They may have had a practice of honoring and commending one another, with prizes for the man who had the keenest eye for the passing shadows, and the best memory for the order in which they followed or accompanied one another, so that he could make a good guess as to which was going to come next. Would our released prisoner be likely to covet those prizes, or envy the man exalted to honor and power in the cave? Would he not feel like Homer's Achilles, that he would far sooner be on earth as a hired servant in the house of the landless man, or endure anything rather than go back to his own beliefs and live in the old way? Socrates asked. Yes, he would prefer any fate to such a life, Glaucon replied. Now imagine what would happen if he went down again to take his former seat in the cave. Coming suddenly out of the sunlight, his eyes would be filled with darkness. He might be required once more to deliver his opinion on the shadows, in competition with the prisoners who had never been released, while his eyesight was still dim and unsteady, and it might take some time to become used to the darkness. They would laugh at him and say that he had gone up only to come back with his sight ruined. It was worth no one's while to attempt the ascent. If they could lay hands on the man who was to try to set them free and get them up, they would kill him, concluded Socrates. Yes, they would, agreed Glaucon. And that's from the Republic 5:16, 5:17. And that's how I end a really short meditation, for whatever reason. I think in part to just let that bit of the allegory, that really important fourth and sort of concluding part of the allegory, stand on its own and move into a reflection, discussion, response the following day. There's no joke in what Socrates is saying here, especially at the end. From the perspective of those who remain in the cave, the friend who comes back, and now I suppose they're aware that one can leave and go somewhere else, which is a strange aspect of the allegory, actually. I'll get to that in a moment. But when he comes back, he's perceived by them as ruined. His eyes are unfocused. He can't make out the shadows. He can't perceive in the way that he used to, and the way that they do. Something's wrong with him. Something's horribly wrong with him. So much so that the cave dwellers, his companions, remaining loyal to him, the one who's been released and now comes back from their perspective ruined, they, if they could, Socrates says, Plato writes, they would kill the one who had released their friend. Now, the obvious connection here is the trial and the execution of Socrates in 399 BC in Athens. The Socrates of the Republic is a figure. It's a persona, it's a voice for Plato. It's also the voice of Plato, the student of Socrates. I mean, it's a strange eulogy, right, that you hear in the Allegory of the Cave, because in fact it's a kind of a eulogy for Socrates. He's the one who suffered the passion of thinking. He's the one who suffered the passion of thinking that comes with the perplexity of not knowing. He suffered wonderment. And in his passion, he drew others into that space. He infected them. As Menon said, he was like the electric eel who, when you came in contact with it, numbed you, stunned you, stupefied you, to use Agamben, Giorgio Agamben's language to describe what happens when people are in study, the modality of study. But it's a serious historical fact that Socrates was executed. And there are serious implications for us, right? That if we think about, and here I mean dwell in the implications of drawing our students into the practice of philosophy, we have to be aware of the responsibility, right, that comes with that. I mentioned that yesterday. Not for fear of the consequences. That's not the point here. Oh, I better be careful, or else if I do it wrong, they'll kill us. But we're already convicted. Right? So this is something that I talked about. And this is something that I discussed with my class last week when we talked about the apology. Socrates, we know from the symposium, was convicted of one thing, and that is that love, philia, the power of love. He was so convicted of that he tried to bring it to others, because he said nothing can help us more in this world than love. And the experience of this philia, this love, and this love of wisdom, really was an experience that was one experienced and shared with friends. Friends did philosophy, and out of this experience, community arises. But in that conviction, one's convicted of bringing into the world something that the world doesn't necessarily want. That is to say, the world constructed by cynicism and opportunism, instrumental reasoning, to use the critical theory language of the Frankfurt School. By those dominant standards and values, philosophy's convicted, guilty of a different order, a different value system, a different attitude. In a world, particularly in the world where I'm working and making philosophy, the world of education, the world of schooling, this work, philosophy, this fundamental ontology, this poetic phenomenology, it's convicted. It's out of bounds. It's countercultural. It's a serious matter, right? And so recognizing this being convicted and having deep convictions That's the serious matter. It is a serious matter. There's no irony. There's no April fooling around when the tradition that you are placing yourself within if it doesn't begin there, it certainly pivots on the execution of Socrates in 399 BC. That's why for me the Phaedo, that dialogue that recounts his last day in life, is so important for me because of the reality of the legacy. This is a legacy that we carry on to take up the work of Socrates and others. But he may be the progenitor. He's certainly a figure that announces very loudly and proclaims very loudly this work as one that's countercultural, that's out of bounds and disruptive and interruptive. So long as we hold on to that, we recognize that this philosophical practice, albeit happening in a multitude of ways, and of course at times with humor, is dead serious. And we have to both be held accountable for it and hold others accountable for it. And that goes for every figure that we turn to, as well as ourselves. It's a somber mood, and which should be, because this is a tale of one who is taken, forced to leave his companions, thrown into a situation where he doesn't know what's going on. His whole world collapses, his whole worldview shatters. He's forced to leave that space without even being able to recover. He's forced up. And then, you know, the tragedy and the blues aspect of the story is really the misreading that Socrates gives of the story, or that Plato offers us, which is to say that, you know, one of the many misreadings, but one of them is that, you know, that this liberated one would just automatically look down upon his companions. But I'm arguing that, in fact, there's other things going on here that obviously would have to be the case. Sure, the feeling, the power of the freedom that he experiences in the open leads him to have a certain desire, but he's empowered at that point. So there's even the question of how he could be forced to go back. He would go back out of a desire to reconnect, right, and recollect with his companions. And in that sense, perhaps he would look back and see the world they were living in as impoverished, right? I mean, especially if we liken this experience to Middle Passage and then slavery, oppression. Once liberated and emancipated, once one encounters freedom, human potentiality, possibility, one can only, that becomes the basis of one's critique of the structures of oppression. So of course. But to his compatriots, to his comrades, to his demos, he will seek solidarity, right? And he'll seek and desire to bring all of them to this place. So the unfinished story, if you will, is the voice first, finally rather, of this liberated cave dweller who declares a time out. Let me speak here, and let me tell you of what I've perceived and where I've been. Don't kill the hermeneutic, don't kill the messenger, don't kill the one who's delivered me. And maybe that figure is Plato. That is to say, that liberated cave dweller. And maybe this is the point of what Plato's doing in his work. I mean, Hannah Arendt says that he wrote the Republic, among other things, so that the world wouldn't sin twice against philosophy. The first sin being that the execution of Socrates. You know, that the Republic, Arendt says, is a dwelling or a safe haven for philosophy. So in this sense, it's Plato speaking up and speaking out on behalf of Socrates. And in this sense, it's a strange kind of eulogy. So I'm well over, but I think that Plato's Allegory of the Cave, which is such an important text for me, deserves some extra time.